The end of the Second World War saw much devastation in Europe and parts of Asia, while North America was left as a relatively unscathed economic powerhouse. Recognizing that economic vulnerability left the door open for ideological and political subversion, the US looked for ways to help lift up some of those regions of the world and help stop the spread of communism at the same time. I'm your host David, and this week I'm not actually talking about the Marshall Plan, but rather Harry Truman's Point 4 program, an aid program designed for the non-European world. This is the Cold War. Life is constantly on the go with work and classes and responsibilities, but there is always time to learn something new, which is why I am so thrilled to be working with the sponsor of today's video, a rising star in the streaming world, Magellan TV. Not only is Magellan TV the highest rated documentary streaming app on Google Play, but it offers the best value of any premium documentary streaming service for both its price and especially its quality. And the reason is that Magellan TV is all about the drama of real life. The lives of ancient pharaohs, critical battles in World War I and II, soldiers who fought in the Civil War, the battles for control of the British Crown, the Norman Conquest. Join us in watching RFK, America's Lost President, and learn more about the Kennedy who could have been president. Magellan TV has the largest and best collection of history shows anywhere. And since Magellan TV has membership gift cards available, they make the perfect gift as we get closer to the holiday season. The Office Secret Santa? Already sorted out thanks to Magellan TV. Not only are there no ads ever, but your subscription always includes 4K. Click the link in the description and join us today. Okay, so we've all heard of the Marshall Plan, the US economic plan to support and help rebuild war-torn Europe. But it certainly wasn't the only foreign aid operation undertaken during the Cold War struggle between the world's two superpowers. The United States had more than a few different foreign aid programs, including one of the earliest, the Point 4 program, a technical assistance program aimed at supporting developing and emerging countries, meaning not those in Europe. Following the end of the Second World War, the United States, as the leading economic powerhouse of the democratic world, launched a series of foreign assistance programs to help in the rebuilding process of their war-devastated allies. Naturally, the focus of these economic projects, including the massive Marshall Plan, was Europe, which prompted countries in the developing world, including South America, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, to complain about this unfair European emphasis. They eventually just asked directly for assistance to stimulate economic development. For their part, the United States fully recognized the enormous diplomatic benefits that such an action could bring, including the prestige they would score at the expense of the USSR, as well as the possibility of securing alliances, or at the very least, a friendly relationship with these nations. From a much more pragmatic and frankly materialistic approach, by providing assistance in the form of cash, technical expertise, and technology, the US would benefit by gaining access to raw materials from many of these former colonial regions. These were materials that were desperately needed by the huge and still growing American industrial complex. Now, what did the Point 4 program look like? Having won the 1948 presidential election, Harry Truman decided to expand US foreign aid programs, stating his foreign policy plans during his inaugural speech on January 20th, 1949. The fourth point, and hence the name of the program, was, "We must embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. More than half the people of the world are living in conditions approaching misery. Their food is inadequate. They are victims of disease. Their economic life is primitive and stagnant. Their poverty is a handicap and a threat both to them and to more prosperous areas. For the first time in history, humanity possesses the knowledge and skill to relieve suffering of these people. The United States is preeminent among nations in the development of industrial and scientific techniques. The material resources we can afford to use for assistance of other peoples are limited, but our imponderable resources are constantly growing and are inexhaustible." Of course, announcing one's intentions is a totally different thing from actually implementing them, and Point 4 was still an idea, not a plan. For this, a special committee was established by the Department of State on the 9th of February, known as the Technical Assistance Group, presided over by Samuel Hayes. The program was officially approved by Congress in May and was signed by the President on the 5th of June 1950 with a budget allotment of $25 million for its first year. Truman's initial desire was for the program to receive almost double the amount of funding, but his request came through rather late, and that's what was deemed available. With the budget in place, the Technical Cooperation Administration, the TCA, at the State Department was created to administer the program. But before we move on, let's give the dollars involved some perspective. The amount of money was minuscule compared to the $2.5 billion that had been poured into the colossal Marshall Plan, and even the $343 million that went to occupied Germany. We should point out, mind you, though, that the program aimed mostly at providing technical assistance and guidance and was not a full-scale economic revival scheme like the Marshall Plan was for Europe. As Truman put it, the natives would have to help themselves. And they did. Iran's government on October 19, 1950, was the first to sign a bilateral agreement with Washington to receive aid under the program. More countries would follow Iran's example, allowing the TCA to establish field missions in order to improve vital economic sectors such as agriculture, as well as sharing technical know-how. Another giant that looked to the US for assistance was newly independent India. The United States, wanting to prevent an alliance from forming between India and either the Soviet Union or China, was more than happy to provide that assistance, which helped in developing the country's medical sector, as well as the creation of major infrastructure projects, including dams. By 1952, much of the developing world had joined Point 4. The entirety of South America, except for Argentina, had joined in, and in Africa, participants included Liberia, Libya, Egypt, and Ethiopia. All of the Middle East joined, as did Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Nepal, Burma, and Indonesia. But as President Truman praised the program as an efficient and, at the same time, inexpensive way to fight off communist influence in the developing world, there were many voices on the opposite side who condemned the additional strain on the US Treasury created by the Point 4 program. This shouldn't come as a surprise, however. There's always someone who's going to dissent. Even the fifth dentist didn't like Trident. Okay, so far this looks like a typical government program, right? Well, the American public sector wasn't the only one involved in Truman's plan. American businessmen were encouraged to invest large amounts of capital into the economies of nations involved with Point 4. This was not an easy task, though. Foreign environments have not always been friendly to American entrepreneurs, and nor did the latter always consider a market worthy to invest in. Areas susceptible to nationalist or communist revolutions, that were subjected to heavy taxation, that experienced frequent nationalizations, or unfavorable legislation to foreign investments generally scared away American capitalists who preferred the security and stability of Western Europe, or areas rich in raw materials that promised an easier or more guaranteed profit. We will note here, though, that even the considerably more welcome economic ecosystem of Western Europe wasn't outright friendly all the time. For example, the French protested against the creation of Coca-Cola bottling factories, among other things. Ultimately, though, the reluctance of American investors to expand into the economies of the developing world worked against Truman's wishes and the goals of Point 4, and ultimately severely hurt American influence in those areas. So, to encourage private investment alongside the program's technical assistance, the Truman administration asked Congress to place guarantees for American investments abroad. This proposal, though it shielded American entrepreneurs, did not pass without backlash, though, as the National Foreign Trade Council complained that the guarantees placed against the risk of investing should be the responsibility of the recipient countries and not Washington. However, despite the Export-Import Bank putting guarantees in place, the Point 4 program just couldn't stimulate enough private interest to invest in those areas. American capitalists simply preferred their old, trusted partners where they continued to pour vast amounts of their money. This is demonstrated by the extreme increase in foreign investments during the period from 1950 to 1957, when the sum of American investments abroad more than doubled from 11.8 to 25.2 billion US dollars. The discrepancy comes when we look at where those dollars flowed to. More than half of the increase was invested in Canada, with South America and Europe following suit with 3.5 and 2.4 billion US dollars respectively. Areas like the Middle East received a smaller share of the increase, which by 1957 had reached $2 billion, yet more than 75% of that sum was poured into the petroleum industry, only leaving behind vital sectors like agriculture. But failure to encourage private investments wasn't the only area where the Point 4 program fell down. Ultimately, its heart and soul, the provision of technical assistance, was corrupted, sacrificed on the altar of the American struggle against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. While it was understood early on to be a propaganda tool, during the first years of the program's existence, the Technical Cooperation Administration had appropriated around $150 million annually for its operations. However, the outbreak of the Korean War saw the TCA being swallowed by the Mutual Security Act, and Point 4 became part of America's defense network, with its aim modified to providing strategic raw materials for the US. The program progressively lost its altruistic character, meant to help those less fortunate, and became yet another trade deal. This was also the new way the Truman administration marketed the Technical Assistance Program to dispense any concerns among the American taxpayers regarding the cost of Point 4 and its weight to the American economy. This turn of events alienated the original supporters of the program, who accused Washington and Truman of promoting imperialism and supporting corrupt and feudal regimes for America's gain, while doing nothing to alleviate the suffering of the people who were in dire need of reforms. Their voices were joined by critics abroad. India officially protested at the United Nations General Assembly that the true purpose of Point 4 was to direct valuable raw materials to industrialized nations, while Egypt's president Gamal Abdel Nasser called it a form of colonial penetration. By 1953, Syria would also join those opposing the program and would refuse direct American assistance. At the heart of the criticism Point 4 faced was the argument that the program was in actuality self-centered and designed to serve US interests abroad. And this was largely true, as much of the infrastructure being built as part of Point 4, such as highways and airfields, was being built for US military and business purposes and did little to help the living conditions of the people where they were actually being built. Sort of missed the original idea that countries joining Point 4 were hoping to get. Now, some of the nations involved walked away from the US and turned to the United Nations to seek funding instead. Burma, Cuba, and Yugoslavia in 1951 proposed the creation of a new international organization that would loan funds to developing nations on lenient terms. However, this and several other propositions throughout the 1950s were vetoed by the United States, who pointed out that bilateral aid programs already existed, making a point that without being a part of the Western network of alliances, there would be no funding. The American stance on the matter would inevitably change, however, when its arch nemesis, the Soviet Union, initiated its own technical assistance programs, forcing Washington to establish in 1957 the Special Projects Fund that had fewer strings attached. Point 4, however, had more or less met its end by about 1953, at least by that name, as President Eisenhower looked unfavorably upon the Technical Cooperation Administration and reorganized it into the Foreign Operations Administration under the directorship of Harold Stason. FOA, however, was also short-lived and was abolished just 2 years later. Its functions transferred to the new International Cooperation Administration, the ICA, which was in turn superseded in 1961 by the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. With a budget of well over $27 billion USAID remains to this day one of the largest foreign aid agencies, with missions in over 100 countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe, providing disaster and poverty relief, as well as technical guidance and financial assistance. And that is Point 4's legacy. Despite its grandiose beginnings and Truman's desire of creating a massive relief plan to align the Third World with American interests against the perceived communist threat, the Technical Assistance Program ultimately could not overcome the many obstacles that lay across its path. Whether these were Congress and the limited budget that it had been given, or the minimal interest shown by American businessmen who, above all else, desired to maximize a secured profit, or the many critics, both inside and outside the US, who pointed out the program's faults and not so hidden self-centered nature, yet the dream of providing aid and altruistically helping those in need did not die with Point 4. It was passed down through different forms and organizations and continues to live on, another legacy of the Cold War. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have invested millions of dollars into a series of international aid programs that can help provide technical assistance on how to press the bell button. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. And this is the Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.